standing by, Republican from North Carolina, also, of course, a member of the House Committee on Homeland Security. Thank you very much for joining us, Congressman. Listening just there to Jen Psaki answering some questions specifically when it comes to security and our Marines. What are your thoughts?
Thank you, Heather, for having me, Bob. My first thought is that Congress needs to be back in Washington exercising oversight. There are indications of catastrophic ineptitude on the part of the administration managing the entire process, culminating in almost watching in slow motion while brave soldiers were murdered yesterday by terrorists with bombs. You know, Jen Psaki just said in her press conference that force protection was going to be central to the efforts going on. And the question becomes, I tweeted a picture this morning that was given to me of conditions 2 days ago with our soldiers looking very much like sitting ducks, standing outside the walls, vulnerable. Was that what force protection was looking like 2 days ago? And if it was, who is it that defines force protection? But, you know, there are many questions, Heather, and I think that the notion that the Speaker of the House has not called us back in a situation where there can be hearings and we can have briefings and ask questions, not in a way that's constrained or confined by the administration, but ask the questions that members want to ask. And it can be confidential. That's perfectly fine. But we need to investigate a whole host of things about how this withdrawal is being conducted, because it is simply disastrous.
And we actually just showed the picture that you had sent out of our armed forces, as you said, appearing to look like sitting ducks. And Bob, that was one of the things that you were asking about yesterday.
Yeah, I was
How
curious,
were so many of them in one area at the same time?
Yeah, why would you do that? Congressman, I went to Iraq for a time in 2003 as a journalist, and the gates there were way more controlled. You never saw that many Marines or other soldiers, other service members lined up like that. They weren't exposed like that.
Bob, that's inexplicable, and there are about 1,000 other things that are inexplicable. Why did we withdraw from Bagram Air Force Base? Was that to achieve some specific number of troop levels so that they had to withdraw and concentrate in one facility? If so, was that strategic under the circumstances? Did the administration share the names of Americans and Afghan allies who are trying to get out of the country with the Taliban? What in the world was the reason for doing that? Now, Heather, and Bob, I'm sensitive to the point that we don't need to play politics, as someone just suggested in that press conference, in the middle of a crisis. But the catastrophic lack of capability being demonstrated day after day, resulting now in the largest loss of American military since 2011, I believe, compels someone to step in. And that's when Nancy Pelosi, as the Speaker of the House, we being the representatives of the people, need to come back to Washington and get that job done now.
And what do you think needs to happen? Who should be held accountable and how?
Look, all the way up to prosecution. All of this, it's interesting. Joe Biden, in his comments yesterday, was asked by Peter Doocy about the only question that could get in by a journalist who would challenge him on anything, asked him about his responsibility. And in two contradictory sentences, he first says he's responsible and then immediately talks about the agreement negotiated by President Trump about withdrawing forces. Well, he's the president, and President Trump's agreement doesn't bind him. He needs to stop making excuses and take on the responsibility for which he ran for election. But I really question whether he is physically capable of doing that. But again, the mix in the White House right now, so that's starting with the president. You've got to ask questions about the military advice he is getting, whether or not military officers, if he's doing things that are catastrophically wrong, they ought to resign and say so publicly.
All right, Congressman Dan Bishop.
Needs to happen.
Yes, sir. Thank you for joining us, Congressman Dan Bishop, and sharing your thoughts, sir. Thank you.
Thank you both.